Welcome to the My Career podcast, and I'm joined by Mitch Lloyd, owner of Petra Jewellery. So welcome, Mitch.
Thank you.
You studied a degree in mechanical engineering.
I did.
And now you are owner of a very successful jewellery business. So can you just tell me how you ended up going from studying mechanical engineering to working in jewellery and in a very creative industry?
Well, it was definitely not my life plan.
Okay.
I'm definitely super happy that I've ended up in this sparkly world of jewellery, but I'm very definitely an engineer. I didn't study mechanical engineering because I had a passion for it. It seemed like a good idea. I was very much a generalist. I didn't do that well in my A-levels. And Swansea University rang me up and they said, we've got some places for females in engineering. Would you like to come do engineering? And I actually was thinking of doing geography because I was one of those young people that didn't know what they wanted to do in life.
Okay.
So that got me into the engineering world. I had done maths and physics at A-level.
Did you enjoy that?
No.
Okay.
And I remember actually one of my first lectures at Swansea University, officially now embarking upon this journey of becoming an engineer. They were talking about integration and heating a rod of metal. And I had this light bulb moment. So all this applied maths I'd done at school in A-levels was very theoretical. And all of a sudden, I could actually understand physically what was going on. You could work out the temperature of this rod of metal at a point X along it, knowing it was one temperature at one end and one temperature at another end. And you could draw a graph to model it. As well. And I still do graphs to model my business, even though it's a jewellery business.
Okay.
So it's useful.
Excellent. Okay. And so you did mechanical engineering. What was that kind of like experience like as a female?
We were very definitely the minority. And I say we, there were 3 of us out of about 55 students studying mechanical engineering. It was very similar in the other engineering departments. And I'm still good friends with those 2 girls now because we did look and feel different to the stereotypical guy that was on our course.
And so you say stereotypical guy. So what are the differences? What was the difference between being a female on that course and your skills and qualities versus the males that were on the course, do you feel?
I don't want to be too stereotypical, but the reality is they were typically Metallica t-shirt wearing, long-haired, very introverted, quite binary young guys.
Yeah.
And the girls on the course and on other engineering courses were a bit more chatty, a little bit more extroverted. We clearly had the communication skills of the group. So when there were things that needed introducing or sharing, it was down to us to do that. We were social secretaries of the course.
Okay.
And whilst there were some students there who were super clever, and really, really good at maths and understood all the formula and the equations much quicker than I did. If they had to stand up in front of a room and explain or express an idea, they found that really uncomfortable.
Okay, that's really interesting, isn't it? So there were sort of like different skill sets required across the whole industry of engineering. So it's about when we talk about a diverse workforce within an organisation, we can see that that's how you would make up your diversity, because you need the mix of
absolutely
those skills.
And the guys who were sort of found some of the engineering principles and the theory and remembering the formula really easy, they wanted to go into a career where they were maybe working on formula and sat at a computer most of the day. And there's a need for that. But there's also a need for somebody to manage that team, to speak the same language, to understand the vocabulary, and to be able to communicate the ideas, to communicate the problems and the challenges, and also look after the human resource. It's not just about the outcome and the problem solving. It's about looking after those people as well who've got lives outside of what's going on at work. And you need somebody in the room that notices when maybe somebody's down about something. And it's not easy. If you've got a group of people who aren't the best communicators, it's nice to have that female touch. And to be able to nurture and show empathy. And it's great for a business if staff are then looked after and they stay and you have staff retention. So I think a lot of engineering businesses and companies know that they do need more of the female influence on a team, but they're struggling because females aren't necessarily going into engineering in the first place.
Okay, and you mentioned sort of a couple of times we're talking about like what you learn in the classroom, like the maths and how it translates into like an actual profession and you can apply it. So if someone is particularly strong and really enjoys maths, then this could be a career that would suit them, even if they hadn't necessarily thought that they could take maths into engineering or their physics as well. It's like, how does that translate into the real world?
You're right, 100%. If you're half decent at maths, and I say that because I'm only half decent at maths, you can get into engineering, and there's some big companies that they will ask for very high grades and in maths and physics. But it's also okay if you're not the most academic, because being a problem solver, thinking outside the box, recognizing that something maybe could be done better than it is now is very different to being good at maths. And so I can quite confidently, now I'm nearly 50, say I'm a good engineer, but I didn't necessarily feel it back when I was in education.
Okay. And we talk about problem solving quite a bit in lots of different professions, and it kind of crops up all the time. So what are those skills behind problem solving? If I'm a young person sitting in a classroom, I'm 14, 15, how would I know if I was a good problem solver? What does that mean when you're younger? Were you a good problem solver then, do you think?
It's a really good question. I probably wasn't aware of it then, but I can see it now in my daughter, who's 14 years old. And from a very young age, she was inventing stuff. We were walking down the road to school, and she must have been in year 3 or 4, and it was raining. She said, "Oh, Mummy, I could have an umbrella that comes out the top of my rucksack, and it will keep me dry, but I still have my hands free, because the problem with umbrellas is you hold them like that." And it made me reflect on my own childhood, where I was quite tenacious with not accepting something didn't work or I couldn't do something. I would work out a way. And I think that engineering thinking applies not just to the mechanics of something, it applies to a process and a system. So I think, my engineering logic in how I run my business now. I'm looking at efficiencies. And I use the analogy of an engine. And I talk in meetings, I go, right, if we were an engine now, we're only going to ever achieve 80% efficiency because you leak through heat and friction and things like that. It's still engineering. Because humans get tired and their mind wanders. They're not always operating at 100% efficiency. And then we break a system down into steps and look at where there's areas for improvement.
Okay, so you talk about your business now and how you are still sort of drawing on your learnings from when you were in university. Have you sort of prior to sort of working in the creative side of engineering, what were the roles that you were in that helped develop that engineering knowledge and skills?
There are so many stories for me to tell and share, because I've had a really wiggly, squiggly career. And I think one of the reasons is because I was a female in engineering. I was very much a generalist. I ended up in investment banking for a little bit. They wanted engineers because of the way we approach things.
Oh, wow. That's not, you wouldn't think that was an obvious link, would you, at all?
No. But a lot of companies want people that think outside the box and don't just do it because that's how we've always done it.
Okay, yeah.
And then I was in the army for about 4 years as a Royal Engineer. And even then it was a very male-dominated environment. And I'm quite athletic and quite fit. You know, I've run at quite a high level, but I'm little and I'm not, you know, my husband was also in the Royal Engineers. He's 6 foot something, I'm 5 foot something. And I still could see then how, as a female, I brought a different viewpoint into tackling a problem, like building a bridge.
Okay.
You know, the guys were like, right, I'm going to do it as quickly as possible. And and maybe the pin wasn't going in to connect the two sections of a bridge together. So I would go, shall we just slow down a little bit, look at and all you got to do is just step back and wiggle it a bit and then it slots in.
Yeah.
And they're not always interested in
taking the time.
Yes.
Okay. Gosh, so that's very different, isn't it? So you know, working in the army, working at an investment bank, and now you're in the creative industry. So did you always have that creative edge? Because you didn't, it doesn't sound like you studied any of like the creative subjects at A level. So
no, and it's something I'm very passionate about now, and why I'm enjoying supporting sort of education and the route to employment, because I didn't study even GCSE art. And I'm super creative. I was always drawing as a kid. And I remember my dad saying to me, you're never going to earn a living drawing pretty pictures, Mitch. And, you know, when your parents can say one thing to you and it becomes quite a core memory, it really affects your wiring.
yes.
So I've had that messaging and script throughout my life. And I've had a few examples more recently where I am now running my own independent jewellers, where I've gone, Dad, look at me. I'm now drawing really pretty pictures and making a really nice living out of it, and working the hours that I want to, and spreading a lot of sparkle and happiness through being a good creative engineer, basically, in a nutshell.
Well, I think that's like a really lovely story, but it kind of it's quite sobering in a way, isn't it, to think about the impact that parents can have on a young person's decision on what pathway to follow. But you know, it's great to see that you've managed to, like, through, like you say, this quite squiggly career, which is absolutely fine to have, sort of like to go off in different directions.
I think it's actually healthier than setting a goal ahead of you and having this straight line path to it and being super rigid, because everything I've done, so for example, working in investment banking, I was only there for just under a year, and I was commuting for 4 hours a day. The money was incredible. I was in my early 20s and earning more money than I could have imagined, but it didn't make me happy. And to learn that lesson that early in life was really important. To learn that it was more important to me to be able to walk my dog rather than paying a dog walker. Yeah. And I don't think all young people are exposed to those learnings. They don't necessarily have those conversations at home around the dinner table. And quite a lot of people in education haven't necessarily been out in industry either to learn those lessons. So you've got to definitely think about what your passion is, what you enjoy, when are you in flow, what does success look like to you? Is it earning lots of money, but is it also having the quality of life that you want to be able to pursue your sports and your hobbies outside of work? I've gone off on a tangent massively there.
No, but it's really, you know, it's very relevant, and it you know, it's something, like you say, that you're not really aware of until maybe you're in a role that you're not enjoying, and then you have to take a step back and go, oh, actually, like, I don't think this is for me, but how am I going to take what I've learned so far and those skills, and like we call them transferable skills, and you know, go slightly off, and maybe you add more skills, you do more learning, and then that can lead you onto a path where maybe you're able to sort of fulfill more of your passions, or get the balance right a little bit more.
I mean, even when you're at your most miserable, when you've ended up in a job really just because you needed a job, and it's super frightening leaving education, going, is anyone going to want me? So you maybe take the first thing that comes along. That's okay, because you learn so much from it. I remember getting off the train every day pretty much in tears, coming down the steps, coming out of Basingstoke station, and it took me way too long to say, Mitch, you're not happy, look for something else. And then I went into project management for a construction engineering company. We were designing and building buildings and refurbishing buildings.
So sort of more linked to your university and your learning.
And managing engineers. There were mechanical and electrical engineers, there were structural engineers, and it was great because they were the guys I was talking about, the stereotypes. But they all needed bringing together on this project. There were deadlines to meet, there was a client to keep happy, there were cookies that needed to be remembered for team meetings. There were tellings off that were needed occasionally. So it all needed leading and project managing, and I definitely slotted into that role, but I knew enough about engineering to question things. And because there are people that like to pull the wool over your eyes or just blag. And having a logical engineering mind was enough for me to just say, can you explain that diagram you've just waved in front of us? And we managed to avoid some big problems in having that approach.
And then sort of bringing it to like your present day role within your jewellery business, how do you draw on your engineering knowledge? You mentioned a little bit about when you're in a team meeting, but what about kind of like using, I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but like some of the techniques, you know, on a much smaller and sort of intricate scale, but I'm assuming that you draw on those when you're designing things, when you're producing things.
Definitely. I mean, we as a business specialise in bespoke commissions, which means we come up with an idea with a customer, design something that's going to suit them aesthetically, but also it's got to suit their lifestyle. So it's got to be structured and engineered in a way that's going to be robust enough and keep the stones secure, but also in the right metal. So for example, I was looking into metals, and I can get quite geeky when I'm doing research and on Wikipedia, and I found out about a metal called palladium that wasn't being commonly used in the jewellery industry, but I realised it had similar properties to platinum. It's in the same area on the periodic table, so it shares a lot of properties. It's not as dense, and it definitely wasn't as expensive. And I was like, why aren't we making simple things out of palladium? So we started making wedding rings and bangles out of palladium. A few years later, the industry picked up on this and started using palladium for particularly wedding rings, and then eventually the London Assay Office developed a hallmark for it, but we were using it years beforehand, and that's only because I'm an engineer, and I thought, this is a good idea, let's try it. And my goldsmith was like, I don't want to use it. I'm like, come on, let's give it a go, it's good for customers, it's much cheaper than platinum.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a lovely example, isn't it, of like your thinking along with your knowledge, so your creativity, but that kind of, you know, physics and knowledge in the background. If you don't know whether you are an engineer or not, or going to potentially become an engineer, if you think, I'm quite often coming up with
solutions for things, or I quite enjoy doing research. Then maybe consider it, because there's so many different directions you can then go in. I had a little project during lockdown. Obviously, we were at the bottom of the list of non-essentials, and my goldsmith was very nervous about losing his fine skills. And he said, Mitch, please just find me stuff to do. And I said, well, let's do some design projects. Let's come up with stuff that we need. And a lot of people have arthritis in the UK. We're quite a damp island in their knuckles, and they can't get their rings on and off. So we developed a hidden hinge system. I've brought one in. This is a bangle. It's a bit easier to see on camera. But we discussed the idea, myself and my goldsmith, and the hinge system's completely hidden. So it's flush, it's got to be comfortable, it's got to be secure, and it can't be too difficult to open and close. And
so then you made rings out of them?
We make rings. And we've actually had a couple from America find our website, found the hinge rings, and when they came over here to elope, to get married, they got us to make their wedding rings because they needed a hinge in them.
Wow, that's a gorgeous story.
Yeah, it's really special. But it was 100% an engineering project. And now we're using it commercially. And there's this factor of, it just feels good to be solving problems for people, because you wouldn't believe how emotionally attached people get to their jewellery. But if they develop arthritis and then can't wear their ring that they've had for 20 years, it's quite sad.
Absolutely.
It's nice. Engineering can be emotional.
Yes, it's a totally different perspective on it, but that's great, isn't it? Because that's what we need to do, isn't it? Is to sort of break down the myths and the stereotypes.
It's not just going and working for Formula One and designing better engines for cars. There's so much more to it. Just in my world, it's understanding metals, it's understanding structure and strength of things, how things can open and close. There's a lot to it. And gemstones as well. Getting super geeky about the different hardnesses of stones. You think, it's just a diamond and it's pretty, but no, there's so much to it. Sort of going more in the being a gemologist sort of direction. If you're an engineering minded person, you can learn about how things are mined. I've got a girl who used to work for me. She now travels the world going to mines and looking at sustainable sources for quality gemstones for the jewellery industry, because we care about those things.
And what about actually like the they make diamonds now, so rather than mine diamonds, this
lab grown diamonds.
So that, where's all that originated from? So that surely is kind of like has an engineering background to that.
We have been forced a little bit through the market to pay a lot more attention to lab growns. They've actually been around for years. But they're more popular now. There's a lot more to it, I think, than, because a lot of them are manufactured in Russia and Belarus. So we've gone, we're not supporting that because of the conflict that's going on in the Ukraine at the moment. But lab grown synthetics have been around for years. And I think if, and they have a place on the market, but they're something I find really fascinating about gemstones and understanding metal is that it's natural. Gold, for example, is one of the most malleable metals that you can make the thinnest compared that you can hammer it really thin. It shines up and it's very unreactive. Which is why, so there's a reason why humans have revered gold for centuries. They might not necessarily understood it from an engineering perspective, but it's always been really valuable because of its physical properties.
Wow, it's amazing.
Sorry if I've got a bit geeky on you.
No, geeky's fine. But I just think it's really nice to like shine a light on just a different perspective, and the it's still very like based on the science and engineering part of it, but it's just putting it into like a creative mindset, and it's just sort of demonstrating that there's a lot more to it, and there are opportunities for someone who in school might be very creative but also can question whether, what they can do with that and the path that they can take. So with regards to like the university route into creative industries, what advice would you give to a young person? Do they need to go to university to pursue a career? If they wanted to end up as a jeweller, for example, or could they start working there, as a little Saturday job, part-time role, working in a jeweller's? What would you say? What advice would you give if someone was watching this and thinking, "Ooh, that's quite intriguing"?
I think if you have a hunch you're not academically inclined, do not go to university just to tick the box. Because how much am I using and have I used throughout my wiggly career that is what I learnt at uni? Probably less than 1%. I don't remember any of the formula, and it was very formula focused engineering. I think what's much more important is recognizing that you might have an engineering mind, an engineering way of thinking, and get into something as applied as you can straight away. So that might be going down an apprenticeship route. Even right now, let's say you're still at school. So university feels like a bit further downstream. Volunteer, go and do work experience. Don't necessarily do it through the formal school system. Network through friends and family and just say, can I give that a go? And if you've got that engineering mindset, and I see it in my daughter who is 14, she's come into my business and gone, "Mummy, why do you do it like that?" And I'm like, yeah, really good point. So you will bring value because of the way you think. And
volunteering is a really great way to like broaden the mind and get experiences that you actually can't get in the classroom, and future employers do find those.
It's a win-win. And you learn so much about yourself as well. And if every experience you do just send you off on slightly different direction, embrace it. Even if you go and do work experience and go, "Oh, that was really dull," work out why you found it dull, and then adjust and go off in a slightly different direction and try something else.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your experience today. It's been amazing to hear about where you started and how you've progressed through very different careers to end up doing something that has kind of brought you back to something you're really, really passionate about, and sort of shining a light on the creative industries at the same time, as well as engineering. But thank you for coming in and sharing your story of being a female engineer.
Thank you, I've really enjoyed it. And if anyone does want to get in touch with me, please send them my way. I'll be very happy to have a chat.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Mitch.
Thank you.